Welcome to the Nobody Guide to Life, where we provide tips and tools for personal growth, personal development, and your spiritual journey that you can use right now in your everyday life. I'm J.A. Plosker. Thank you for joining us. Find out more at thenobodyguidetolife.com. You can also join our Simple Spirituality group on Facebook. If you like what you hear on the show, we'd welcome a subscription or a review. We'd really appreciate it. Have you been a caregiver to a loved one, or maybe you're a caregiver by profession? So if you have given care to a loved one, or you are a caregiver by profession, you know that any care, big or small, can carry with it a real range of emotions. But when we love someone, when we truly love someone, that care is often given with an open heart and feelings of intense love and sometimes gratitude. So my guest today cared for her brother while he transitioned from his earthly experience, a transition brought about from cancer. Ellen Schilling had no idea that this 16-month experience would change her life forever. Inspired by a miraculous event on the day of his transition, Ellen delved into others' near-death experiences and started her spiritual quest, leading her to say yes to everything and to unveil her authenticity, her legacy. Her business, Unveil Your Legacy, now includes coaching and inspirational jewelry design as Ellen helps others unveil their greatness. And her work also benefits the Joy Bus, a business providing meals to homebound cancer patients. It's all a way of helping others to see joy and their own greatness. Welcome to the show, Ellen.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here.
Well, it's just wonderful to have you here. Now, that sounds like quite a journey you were on there.
It does. I was listening to you say it, and I thought, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. So what got you onto the path of personal and spiritual growth? Where were you before that day of transition? How did that journey begin?
You know, it's so interesting when I reflect back to, let's even say 4 years ago, I really didn't have any spiritual foundation at all. And so I'm a real story of growth and accelerated growth, if you will, from a real devastating scenario.
Right.
So my foundation was simply living, and I'm not even sure if it was really presently living. I was kind of going through day by day and not really aware of the greatness that surrounded me and that was within me.
Was spirituality something that you had, or even personal growth, something that you had been thinking about, or was it just not even part of your experience at all?
Not even part of my experience at all. It's interesting because, again, in reflecting, I've lived a charmed life, and I've had a lot of successes in my life, but it never came to a depth of what my beliefs were and what my direction was. And with this scenario that happened, and I consider it a gift that my brother has given me, it's allowed me to take those steps and now started to run with my spiritual growth and development. And I'm so grateful for that.
So coming into that caregiving experience, you went into that caregiving experience with no foundation. How were you able to process that caregiving experience early on with no frame of reference to spirituality? What were the feelings that you had early on in that experience?
Well, that's a great question, and it's part of a bit of the humor that goes along with this. When I think of my spiritual direction, my brother lived in New York, so I became someone that was very curious about the medical part of his care, and my experience in his caregiving was really hiding behind the clipboard of all of the tests and the reports that came back from his cancer.
Right.
And so my tapping into my emotions, I completely denied that and put that on the back burner. And it was a very interesting scenario of, and I refer to it as hiding behind my clipboard. And I had all of that, and I stuffed my emotions. I stuffed the grief and the fear and the management of that through the process. That the day we brought him home, we had him for hospice. We had him set up a beautiful bed in the living room. The lighting was perfect. The music was perfect. His amazing friends had set this all up for his journey home. And we had the most perfect place for him. And I walked in and someone said to me, "Here's a cup of soup. Why don't you sit down?" And at that moment, my job was done.
Right.
We had hired a private nursing team, so they were taking care of all of the medical part of it. And all of a sudden, someone took my clipboard away.
Right.
Now I immediately had to start dealing with the emotional part of it. And boy, that was a lot to take in that one moment.
Can you walk us through that? I know there were so many emotions going on, and that clipboard image is really interesting. If we have an experience on this journey that suddenly rips away all the veils, all the things we were hiding behind, and we're just left there standing with our emotions, that lens is gone. What was going through you at that moment? What can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. And the experience that I went through with that is so vivid in my memory, and the people there that I can go right back to that moment where the beautiful aromatherapy that we had a craniosacral therapist that came and did this beautiful work on my brother while he was home. Imagine the most beautiful aromatherapy. Again, the perfect lighting, the artwork in his home was moved around so that from his hospital bed, he could see this most beautiful artwork that he cherished. And the lighting was perfect. Again, we had Brian Eno playing on the music. It was just perfect. And again, I walked into a scenario that, again, the clipboard was taken away. I immediately sat down in a chair, a big overstuffed club chair, if you will, across from his bed. And of course, I didn't eat the soup because it was certainly something that my stomach was a bit churning at that point.
Right.
But I had an opportunity, and the chair was placed kind of in the corner. So I had an opportunity to really look and see exactly what was happening in that room. And that's where I realized, wow, this is really going to happen.
Right.
This is really going to happen.
Right.
And that was the emotional part of it, that I need to become present in this moment or I'm going to miss this all.
Right. Is this something you had talked with him about? Is this something that you two processed together? Because this is so powerful for both of you. And I know you were so close. Did you talk to him about this, about how profound this was for both of you?
That's a great question. And again, another really strong part of this experience for me. One of my most vivid memories of this, and I just had this conversation the other day with his husband, who was his main caregiver and the love of his life. We had a conversation that brought us back to a moment where the doctors kept saying, when you have options, we're good. When you have options, we're good. And the day came where they said to my brother, John, there are no more options.
Right.
And the doctors left the room, and it was the three of us sitting in the room, my brother, his husband, John, and my brother, John. And my brother looked at his husband and said, do you think I'm going to die? And his husband so eloquently gave the most beautiful, supportive, I will be with you through this whole process, connection of words that was so comforting to my brother. And then my brother looked at me and he asked me that same question. Ellen, do you think I'm going to die? If I knew then what I know now, I would have given a different answer.
Interesting.
And my spirituality and my growth and my process through this transition has taught me that now my answer would be, tell me what you're feeling about this.
Right.
Because this really doesn't have to do with me. This is not my process. This is not my journey. This is his journey.
Right.
And at the moment, my answer to him at that time was, of course, I'm going to do whatever you can, or whatever I can, rather, to get the right testing and get the best doctors. And it was a very ego-driven answer.
Right.
Again, if I knew then what I know now, it would have been a very different conversation.
Right. But as somebody listening to you tell the story takes on so much more power because you didn't know then what you know now. Hearing you tell it in retrospect, that stark difference between the egocentric answer and the heart-centered answer is so powerful. It sounds like that was one of the precious gifts of that moment, is the ability to reflect on it this way.
There is no doubt, you're exactly right, that I look at all of the gifts that my brother has given me, and I'm a believer that his transition and his journey I was chosen to be there for that. And I take that gift that he has given me of choosing me to be part of his process. I take that very seriously. And this is part of my thoughts with Unveil Your Legacy of what our greatness is that if you are given that opportunity to be with someone, to care for them, and if you are given the gift to be with them through their transition, that is an obligation that you have to move forward with your own personal growth, because there's greatness in that.
Right, right. And one of my teachers said to me once, sometimes we need to give people an opportunity to be of service to us in any circumstance. So even in last moments, last breaths, you were giving him, it sounds like, an opportunity to leave a legacy, to be of service in such a powerful way. It almost defies words.
There's so many memories that I have of our time together that are so precious to me. And one of the words that I can kind of wrap his whole experience up in the last weeks, even months, is surrender. And he completely surrendered himself to his amazing husband, John, myself, and to himself. And you could see that every day. And that surrender of his human experience took him steps further into the next realm, where he is now simply behind the veil.
Right.
It's a beautiful image, and that surrendering that he did so powerfully and so graciously and so eloquently, that it was all orchestrated before this whole process even started.
Wow. Now you talk about the miraculous around that. Can you define for us or talk through? I know we've been talking around it probably, but can you pinpoint that piece, that miraculous piece for us?
The piece of my spiritual growth?
Well, right, because you say that you had a miraculous experience during this. Is that what we've been talking about? Or is that miraculous event, did something else happen that you consider to be that defining moment for you?
For me, there was absolutely a defining moment. My brother transitioned on the supermoon on November 14th, which is a Monday morning of 2016.
Right.
Saturday morning, he began to tell us what was going on. And he started to tell us what he was seeing. Wow. And what he was feeling. And of course, at that time, it being 48 hours prior to his actually physical transition from this realm, it was something that we all thought, of course, it's going to happen this Saturday morning.
Right.
But he, in my spiritual process and belief and establishment of how this whole process works, it does take time for the soul to travel through the veil. And his explanation of his journey, the beginning of his journey, I immediately was taken aback. And that's the moment where I said, holy moly, there is something much bigger than what we have here. And I needed to delve into that. And you touched upon it briefly in my bio, in which I needed to figure out what he was experiencing and what was my responsibility of passing that information on.
Can you share some of his words from those moments with us? Can you talk about what that sight, that second and third and fourth sight that he was acquiring, can you talk to us a little bit about what that was for him?
I absolutely will. And, some of that is private, that it's such a gift for me, but I would love to give you some of the insight. I'll set the scenario because it was a beautiful scenario. His husband wanted to embrace him. So we put his husband in bed with him. His sister-in-law was at his feet, rubbing Idaho blue spruce essential oils into his feet. That is we had learned that is a great support of transitioning.
Right.
And so you can imagine that smell of Christmas in the air.
Right.
And I was up holding his hand, and all of us were supporting him in telling him, the usual things I think that one would say is that it's okay. We're going to take care of each other. It's time to go. And my brother started to talk about how he had seen his first two, or he was seeing his first two Bernese mountain dogs that he cherished.
Interesting.
And the conversation was about 40 minutes. He never opened his eyes. And he was talking about how many angels were there and how beautiful it was. And the last thing the words that he said was, "I see Buddha."
Wow.
And, in what I learned in my spiritual growth is that once one becomes enlightened, they have not only seen Buddha, but they actually find their true self. And that was such a comfort for me to know that in those last moments, he had found himself. Beautiful. It's an incredible memory.
There's so much written out there about that dying process and how some people say, well, it's the brain, compensating for the fear of dying. And other people say, no, this is a real transition. And you and your brother had such a moment there. And I'm wondering if you can describe, while that beautiful conversation was taking place, the energy you were feeling, the energy in the room. Can you put words to that?
Wow, that's challenging.
Yeah.
It was a sense of peace and a sense of calm. The three people, my brother-in-law John, his sister Susie, and myself are bonded now through this experience forever. And it was certainly this I guess peace is really the tranquility that was in that room. There was no heightened energy. It was very calm.
Right.
We were calm. There was no sense of panic for us. It was just peace. It was quiet. And again, the lighting was dim. The music was playing. His words were coming out. The aroma of Christmas. It was just a very calm and peaceful, 40 minutes to an hour of quiet.
Right. And we talk about moments like that sometimes in a bubble. And I know TV shows, movies, sometimes they end at that moment. So how did you make the bridge back to the world outside of that room? What was that journey like, bridging the gap between that amazing experience that you shared and the life that was waiting for you on the other side?
So after my brother transitioned, I came back to Phoenix.
Right.
And I fell apart. My clipboard was gone. And I had a very short 4 days of his transition time at home to manage that. And of course, there were so many emotions during those 4 days while he was at home. But I came back to Phoenix and completely fell apart. My husband had organized some options for me to be able to talk about my journey, what had happened, some support groups and things of that sort. But I came out of that and said, again, I just experienced something that is much larger than me, right, that I need to know more about. Hence starting my spiritual growth and my personal growth.
Wow. And what did you, because I think this could be a very important message for a lot of listeners. Where did you go first? I mean, how, you just had this moment, and sometimes I think people get on the path to have that moment, and some people have that moment and then get on the path. So what did you reach for? Where did you go? What were the things that you grabbed onto that were really made sense to you in light of what you had just witnessed?
Again, another great question. My process through the moment I landed in Phoenix was the synchronicities of the universe. And it was one after the other.
Wow.
The first one, which started my journey, was I had come back to Phoenix and I immediately started to go to a support group at Hospice of the Valley. It was very important for me to talk about my loss. And what I've learned is that people that experience loss are in a club that we never signed up for the membership. But we're here. And not everyone understands that. My husband, who is the most supportive of me, couldn't understand why I was in fetal position on the sofa for days on end.
Wow.
And he would supportively say, do you want to take a shower today? Can I get you some lunch? And he couldn't understand why I just couldn't function.
Right.
When I would go to my support groups, my Hospice of the Valley group, seeing a stranger across the table when I was telling my story, nod their head and saying, oh yeah, I know what that's about. Incredible comfort to know that someone got me, someone understood what I was experiencing.
Right.
That was my first step. The synchronicities through this amazing universe happened when my brother-in-law, my brother's husband, John, called me and said, I just read this amazing book by this woman, Anita Moorjani. It's called Dying to Be Me. She had a near-death experience. It's her memoir. You have to read it. So I said, absolutely. I was a sponge at that point for information. I went on Amazon, ordered the book, and a couple of days later, I have a dear friend whose name is Hamilton, who has had a near-death experience himself, who's been very supportive in my healing. And 2 days later, Hamilton sent me a text and said, I have a book that I want you to read. It's by an author named Anita Moorjani. It's called Dying to Be Me.
Interesting.
And the key phrase that I say through all of this is, of course you do. Because that's what the universe does for me, right? Whenever these synchronicities happen, I would say, of course it is. Of course the universe is doing this to me.
Right.
So I happened to, I read the book. It completely resonated with me. And then hence started my journey with reading other near-death experience authors and delving into the idea of the process of transitioning.
Right. And that seems to be very closely related then to your next venture, which was this idea of legacies. Can you talk to us about how all of those things you experienced then led you to this idea of legacy work?
Absolutely. When my brother transitioned, I thought I needed to create something that he would always be remembered by, or hence a legacy.
Right.
I thought of, an art installation. My brother owned a custom frame shop in New York City and lived in the West Village and in Chelsea for most of his adult life. So was very well known in New York and in the art community. And so I thought maybe we'll donate some artwork to Sloan Kettering, or we'll create a foundation or something real obvious that you think of when you think of legacy,
right.
What one would be remembered by, right? And I really struggled with that. And I talked to his husband about that, and we were collaborating ideas and what that was going to look like. And nothing really came to fruition about what was going to feel right that we wanted to both move forward with.
Right.
I had a conversation with a girlfriend that her father-in-law, was coming to Phoenix, and she was struggling with the fact that it was going to be a lot of, almost an inconvenience, or there was going to be a lot of work around having him here.
Right.
And I was talking to her about the 30 days that this man's going to be in her life. And I went ahead and said to her, I would invite you to think that love may be your legacy. And it was the first time the word legacy came out of my mouth in that context. And her reaction to that was so powerful of, wow, I never thought of that. And it really turned around her heavy reaction to this man coming into her space to something of a gift.
Right.
And I started to think about the legacy that people give or people have or people leave is not something that's tangible or that is something that we read in a book or we see on a wall. I mean, you look at really high profile people like Steve Jobs, and we think of, the Apple computer and the iPhones and the watches but the legacy of Steve Jobs that he wanted was the connection that he had with people.
Right.
And that's when I started to think about my brother and the love and the generosity that he had in caring for people and loving people and making people happy and children laughing and his friends feeling loved and cared for. That's what I wanted him to be remembered by. So I simply started to talk to people about their greatness and what that looked like for them and how important it is not to wait till that time of transition to unveil that, but to rather start that now. Do this today because we don't know what tomorrow brings.
And how do you help people now in your business? How do you help people to have that love may be your legacy moment. What do you do to help people to discover that in their own lives?
It's interesting in talking with people about legacy because some people have it. Some people know it. They are clear. They are spot on of what they know that they want to be remembered by, remembered
Right.
for. Others need a little bit of coaching. So I am a personal greatness coach, and I talk to people about what that looks like for them with different various tools. Successful one that has been used is talking about what I like to say, your future self.
Right.
Of, flashing forward to 40, 50 years and what that person, what you in 50 years is going to tell you today.
Right.
And the marks that you've made. That's been a powerful tool for a lot of my clients. It's interesting when I simply ask, have you ever thought about what your legacy is? And the response is very powerful because I ask those words, and then what I do is I close my mouth. And people, I'm learning, just want to tell their story.
Right.
And the answers that we have to our greatness, to our legacy, to what we want to be known for is inside of us. This is not something that we need to teach. This is not something that you need to learn in a book. The answers are inside of us.
Right.
And that is where I come to by inviting people to say yes to opportunities that come their way, because don't close off any opportunity because you don't know what that's going to lead you to. You don't know if that's going to be part of your greatness.
Right. That's true. And we make assumptions sometimes about what we think we want our legacy to be, when maybe if we want to talk about the universe or whatever, it may have a different plan. So I love what you say there, because if we say no to a group that comes up, or a friend wants us to go with them to a reading or whatever, if we say no to those events, we may be delaying or missing out on something that can really help us shape our lives in very special ways.
I completely agree. And I find that with my journey, I have said yes to everything. And, my process of coming to this point has been saying yes to everything. I also invite people to remember that saying no to others is saying yes to you.
Can you unpack that a little?
I will, yeah. My husband, who was a very linear thinker, when I talked to him about saying yes to everything, his response was, Ellen, I can't say yes to everything. I don't have enough time during the day. I have meetings. I can't say yes to everything. And I invited him to think that saying no to some of those meetings, saying no to some of the new projects that you have, is actually saying yes to you and your personal time.
Right. Love that.
And it's amazing. And this conversation came about as he was coming down over the stairs. I was in our living room, and I posed the question to him, and he said, I have a lot of work to do. I can't talk right now, but I'll sit down for a few minutes and we'll have this conversation. And we proceeded to talk about saying yes to everything. And I posed the idea of saying no to others and yes to you. Well, a few hours later, we're still having this conversation. And I invited him to remember, and a couple of hours ago, you were ready to go back to work. But instead, you said no to your work, and you said yes to our marriage and our connection.
Wow.
And he had an aha moment. He said, I get it. I understand it now. And so there are scenarios that, yes, you do need to say yes to those house guests. You do need to say yes to the invitations to readings. You do need to say yes to new jobs and moving across the country. You do need to say yes to that. But there are also, you need to give yourself permission to say no to those times that are going to give you the space to be in the quiet where you find the answers.
Right. And the power of something we talk about on the show a lot: discipline, discernment, the ability to get quiet enough inside of you so that you can discern between a yes-no time. And that's also, that's a muscle you have to build over time.
I completely agree. Absolutely. And it's hard.
It's hard. It's very hard.
It's not an easy thing to do because I think some people are on one end of the spectrum that they want to physically do everything. And then you have others that really want to stay introverted and not do anything.
Right.
So you need to find that space where you can have the quiet and the peace to find those answers. That statement you made completely resonates with me and my journey of getting quiet and what my strict meditation practice brings me to, and the connection I have with my brother, and the time that we communicate and we relate to each other in this realm, that I love to say that he and I are equally as close now than we were when he was in his physical space.
Right.
Because of those quiet moments.
Right.
And when you say no to those, when you're so busy and when you're answering all of the yeses and not saying yes to yourself, you will miss those quiet times where the answers appear.
Right.
Really, really agree with that.
Well, it's and it takes time. It just takes time. It takes patience. And when you hear a voice inside your head, when you say a prayer or you ask for guidance and you hear it in your head, saying yes to that instead of saying, no, that's just my thoughts. Try it. We always talk about testing the gods. Look, I'm not telling you to believe anything you hear on this show. We have these amazing guests who have all these amazing insights. I'm not asking you to believe everybody that comes on the show. Take that knowledge and apply it in your own life and test it. It's very, very powerful. You build discernment through testing and experimenting. It is in some ways very appealing to the linear thinker because it's open for testing. It's available.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And you will never know if you don't try it.
That's
will never
beautiful.
know. Yes, you will never, ever know. And my life could have been very different if I want to go back to that fetal position on the sofa where I didn't reach out for the help with hospice, where I didn't start to read books, where I didn't become a certified life coach, where I didn't start to talk about legacy, where I didn't start to, let's talk about all the opportunities that I've had that I've said yes to. Right. That have brought me to this moment that I am so at peace with the loss of my brother. Granted, I miss him desperately every day, but his transition has been a gift. Wow. And it is my obligation. It is absolutely my obligation to, and what I like to refer to as my dharma, my life work, to invite people to find their greatness. And I'm strictly a conduit for that. I am just the one that invites people to do that and to go on their journey to find their greatness. And maybe it's a piece of touchstone jewelry that they have. Maybe it's a conversation that we have, whatever that looks like. But once you find that, now it's your responsibility to go inspire others. What a beautiful place this would be if this is what we were talking about, and this is what we were doing, is talking about the greatness that we have within, these humble brags that we can talk about, right. Inspire other people to do their greatness. What a right. great place this would be.
It would be amazing. And look, it doesn't always have to be, this show's about personal development, personal growth, and the spiritual journey. It could be as simple as your work with the Joy Bus, giving something back in the memory of someone you love. That's also a very powerful way of saying yes and of leaving that legacy. So it doesn't always have to be a spiritual moment. It can also be a giving moment, a charitable moment. That's powerful too.
Absolutely. And my connection with the Joy Bus, which is, as you said, an organization that provides meals to homebound patients that are undergoing chemo and radiation, is a very similar operation to God's Love We Deliver, which was connected to my brother. His dear friend John Gilman is on the board of directors at God's Love We Deliver, which is a huge operation in New York City that does a very similar thing that the Joy Bus does as far as offering meals to people that need them. Wow. Completely free of cost. There is no charge to people that need these services. So very, very powerful. My process of getting involved in that was, again, saying yes. It happened to come across one of my social media pages. I said, I have to go check this out. Here's my yes. I have to go find out what this is about. Right. Happened to go up to the Joy Bus and sat in the corner for breakfast, because you can go and have breakfast there, and watched this whole operation. I knew nothing about this except what their mission statement was. I came home and got on their donation their volunteer page, started to go up on the weekends and fill syrup and put, fill coffee for people having breakfast, and got to know the owner, Jennifer Caraway, who's a rock star with her legacy of helping people. She in turn as well had a friend who her name was Joy, who transitioned from ovarian cancer. And Jennifer's legacy is now in the memory of her friend Joy. Like this all comes full circle.
Right.
And the irony of all of this is Jennifer is now at the Joy Bus working with God's Love We Deliver in New York City to get, and of course, we're going to say, of course she is, right? But she's doing work with getting some more awareness around the Food is Coalition, the Coalition for Food is Medicine, where people need to realize that when people are battling illness, it's important to have nutritionally balanced meals because that is a healing aspect to them. And it's a beautiful story of how I can honor my brother and how there are other amazing people out there doing the same work. And it's just, we need to get these stories out about people that are living their legacy and living their greatness and making a difference in so many lives. Beautiful.
Well, so to help us all do that then, so what's a tip or tool from all these amazing experiences you've had? What's a tip or tool you can offer us right now that we can use as soon as this podcast is over to live that life?
This is something that we touched on a little bit earlier, and it's something that I feel very, very strongly about. And once you get off this podcast, it is saying yes to the next question that comes to you. No doubt. Just saying yes. And there is no hesitation. There is no thinking. There is just yes. And it's amazing what will happen when you start to do that. You get a mind shift. You get a new perspective of your greatness. And it's almost like dipping your toe in the water. I don't expect people to jump in and to start swimming into the deep end with this.
Right.
But by taking that one next question that your listeners will get by the next one that they get from this podcast and confidently saying, yes, I wonder what that would look like and the opportunity that would blossom from that. And I would invite people to do that. Again, this very next question, and the success that they have with that, build upon that. Start to build your legacy. Start to say yes to the next one, and then to the next one. Maybe you need to say no because you need a little bit of time to yourself. But do that following. So my tip would be to immediately start saying yes, because that's something you can do right when you push pause from this podcast.
I love it. And with that wonderful piece of advice, I want to thank Ellen so very, very much. Thank you for your time, Ellen. Thank you for sharing such a personal journey with us.
It's been such an honor, and I'm so grateful for you for the work that you're doing and the legacy that you're building. And I'm just such an honor. It's an honor to be a part of that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I want everyone listening to do some thinking about your own legacy. Remember, it's not just the shiny diamonds we leave behind in our wills. It's the everyday wisdom. It's the rich example we set for those left behind who keep walking their path. We help others when we're gone by leaving them something more than material goods. We can leave them with powerful memories and encouragement for the journey ahead. You can find out more about Ellen at www.unveilyourlegacy.com, and you can learn about the Joy Bus at www.thejoybusdiner.com. Those links and some other links that came up in the show, those will be at thenobodyguidetolife.com. And remember, you can always find out more at thenobodyguidetolife.com, and you can also join our Facebook community, Simple Spirituality. If you like what you hear on this podcast, please consider a review or a subscription. We'd really appreciate it, and it really helps. Keep practicing and have a good week.